Do you say yes to other people so that you don't miss out? Or do you say yes to other people so that you receive love?
So I usually say, let me get back to you. That's a boundary that I do, and it has saved me because I get to tap back into me and my body and my connection.
Samantha Joy joins me on the podcast this week as an Enneagram Type 7 and the author of a book called The Less Effect. Her mission is to educate people on how to step into their authentic self by letting go of items in your physical, social, and habitual environments. We dig deep into how she was possibly mistyped as a Type 2, the helper, for years and years and years before she finally uncovered the fact that she was an enthusiast on the Enneagram. We talk a lot about parenting and her career in upper-level management in the financial industry before she set out on her own. She's running a program right now based on how she went from food stamps to 6 figures in 9 months. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with one person. And while you're at it, leave us a 5-star rating and a written review on iTunes or Spotify. That really helps us get the message of the podcast out to more people. Without further delay, let's get into today's episode with Samantha Joy. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm joined in person, which is rare these days, with my guest, Sam Joy.
Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to have you.
I like the in-person. This is good.
This is good. And this is a friend of yours' office. So like a co-working space, downtown Denver. We're like, when I was parking, there might be like 8 people on the street, which is...
It's weird.
It's eerie, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, you'd think it'd be much busier. I got a parking spot with no issue.
Mm-hmm.
That I can appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually
Yes.
it's not that easy.
Some benefits come out of like a slower paced life.
Yep.
And you're an author.
I am. Yep.
And you wrote a book called The Less Effect.
Yep.
Tell me why you chose to write a book called The Less Effect.
Well, if you read the book, you'll see I share a lot of my personal story in there and my own experience. What came out of that was, I'm going to simplify it and summarize it, is that I really discovered that the solution to most, if not all, of our problems is not found in adding more. It's found in removing something, releasing something, shedding something. And I learned that because I, at a very young age with my single mom, got into personal development. She was getting into it, and so I'd like steal her books. I was like 13. I think the first book I read was Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. I'm sure many people have heard of this book. And I just started to learn that I could become conscious of my thoughts, and I could kind of work through my own mental challenges through meditation and journaling and all these different types of rituals, and just kind of diving into that at a really young age. And as I was growing up, I would feel relief in certain areas from these practices and from this way of thinking, but I would tend to keep going back to old patterns and going back to like, the same crappy relationships, the same jobs, just the same things, just looked a little different, but it was just disguised, the same thing.
Right.
So after I moved 6 or 7 times in one decade, whether it was for a new job or a relationship or just to escape, and I realized I had been, I'd move and I would purge all of these things in my home, and I would leave relationships and I would leave jobs, and just because I was leaving an environment, my routine was kind of shaken up. So like for a moment, I would release some habits. Of course, all of this would come back, new place, same habits, same patterns. So I noticed that after a lot of healing work and therapy, and I dove into hypnotherapy, which was just massive. That was life-changing for me. I noticed that I was using a lot of these tools to fix myself, not to find myself. So I was just adding more. I was broken, I wasn't enough, and I had to be somebody else. And I think a lot of people out there in the personal development world, mainstream spirituality, we're almost abusing it. We're using it in a way that is bringing us, or pushing us rather, further away from ourselves, because we're using it to fix ourselves. We're using it to become somebody else or more like them or good enough or whatever we think that looks like. Right. And that's what I was doing.
Right.
And then I guess it was 2015 maybe, discovered minimalism. And I was like, oh, because I grew up, you know, the generation of my parents, the baby boomers, there's a lot of like living in lack, and like and how that manifests is holding on to things and hoarding things. And I use the term hoarding lightly with my mother, but it was a lot of like money's hard to make, and you know, at any moment this could be gone, and just a lot of lack mentality. And so because of that, we were just, there's a lot of things around, a lot of piles of stuff. Like I think we had like piles of magazines around, and just, you know, all that crap that we don't touch that collects dust. And so just through that experience, I, you know, of exploring minimalism and realizing and making the conscious connection of, first, oh, okay, this, when I clear off my desk or clear out my closet and I'm moving into it with intention, I feel lighter. I feel clarity. The answers come. I feel more productive. And I feel, this is the most important thing, I feel more like me.
Okay.
And I just took that and ran with it. And I, prior to the book coming out, I was working with a coach at the time, and he was like, well, this is your method. Like, let's carry this into your whole life. And I'm like, yeah, if I feel this good clearing out physical items in my physical environment, like imagine if I did that socially, which it sounds crazy. It sounds aggressive. It sounds kind of cutthroat. But if we're living one life on this earth, like why would we spend time with people we don't want to? People that aren't bringing out our best self, people that, you know, on both ends, that we're just not putting in all the effort into the relationship, and it's not going anywhere, and it's not serving either of us. You know, why would we do this? So taking inventory of that and learning how to have tough conversations, which helped me in my own evolution of, oh, there's this thing called boundaries. Okay, this is a cool concept. This is a scary ass concept, but it's a cool concept of, wow, I can really honor myself and put myself first and show others how to teach me, or treat me rather, and teach others how to treat me. And when we are lacking the boundaries, that's when we're always teaching people how to treat us, right? And it's going the other direction. So moving into the social aspect of that, and then moving into the habitual aspect of the environment, you know, our routines, what we're doing every day, and understanding the cold hard fact that every moment is creating something. It's pushing us in one direction or another. And, you know, the minutes become hours and days and weeks and months and years. And that's, you know, I think we've all, hopefully, all had the moment where we're like, oh my God, how do we get here?
Right.
And then understanding there can be different. We can create different by, you know, taking responsibility of the state of our life and realizing we piled all this stuff on and we're hidden, you know, based on the conditioning growing up from our caretakers or educational system or religion or society, media, all of these external factors, and stepping into that shift of, okay, I'm in control now. I can choose differently. And so environment is such a big theme of this, and led me, it just was like through meditation, I was like, the less effect, this is it. Like, this is what has, you know, I grew up being told you have generalized anxiety disorder, you may have depression. I was never actually diagnosed, but realizing that, like, when you put others before yourself your whole life and it becomes a habit, and you design your entire life in an environment around who you think you're supposed to be, yeah, you're going to be depressed. Yeah. You're going to have anxiety. Yeah. And you're not going to be conscious to why. So, the less effect came to me in a meditation. I put a beta program together of how to clear these areas out of our life, and more importantly, once we have the space, how to step into intention and design those spaces, you know, physically, socially, habitually, and take back control, honor ourselves, and honor what we want. And so that's when the noise quiets. You know, that's when we can listen to our inner GPS, I call it, right? That North Star within all of us. And so I wrote a book about it, and it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon twice, which was incredible.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it came from the heart. It was a labor of love. I remember writing this book when I was in my first trimester pregnant. I was like, TMI, throwing up all the time, everywhere,
and writing a book at the same time.
And I was an executive at a company, a VP of a consulting firm out in New York, running a team across the country, and running my coaching business. So if you want to write a book and you're making excuses, you might want to look into that, because it can happen.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
One question that I want to ask is, when you were eliminating relationships from your life, how did you go about doing that? How did you choose who to set the boundaries with?
So a really important step that I had to go through before I could actually even understand who I had to address. We won't even talk about eliminate. That was too scary for me. Right? And that was learning to connect with my body. And I think for a lot of people, when I put people through my program, it's, what does this have to do with that? And what it has to do with that is understanding what, just on a very basic level, what feels healthy to us and what doesn't. I don't like to use good and bad. I think that the labels kind of can skew our perception of a lot of things.
It's very performative, isn't it? Yes. It's outcome-based thinking.
Yeah. It's not in the present, and it's it's making a story a lot of times. Yeah, I love that you said that. That's spot on. So when I personally went through hypnotherapy and worked with healers and started to understand how to connect with my body and how to say, okay, I meet you, like meeting you today, Dave, and like I am having a very positive reaction energetically in my body. So I'm going to move forward with this. Like literally taking baby steps of, I'm going into work and I'm having to meet my boss first thing in the morning. This feels bad, unhealthy.
Right.
We're all conditioned, right?
I'm feeling something in my body.
A lot of us perceive it as bad, and that's okay. That's the first step. If you have to label it, you're going to get there. I feel this doesn't feel right. I don't feel at ease. I don't feel clarity. A lot of times a big flag is I don't feel present.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in fear mode. So I'm in the future of what could happen, or I'm worrying, or I'm, in my trauma somehow, this triggers a trauma, and triggers, that's a whole nother discussion, can be positive because it shows us, maybe if this relationship is serving us or not.
Yeah. And
what we need potentially to work on within us. But that's where it started for me, was we have to crawl before we can walk, and we can meet the love of our life and be terrified and run the other way when this could be the perfect person, and not understand it and make excuses, or the other way of a relationship where it feels good because it's validating, not because it's really
the
serving
right fit
us.
For us. Okay.
Yeah. So without going too deep into that, that's where it started for me. And then there's a lot of modalities around that I teach to help people move into that space of being hyper connected with their body and their emotions and what their own desires are. And then we start to listen to that inner guidance system. And when we can do that, we can say, I'm going to give you an example. Being a VP of a company felt really good. Being around my boss in that capacity felt really good. I was really validated. I was 32 at the time in a male-dominated industry of accounting and finance technology, right? How that happened, I do know how that happened, is I am a people pleaser, and grew up just shooting for the stars, not necessarily a star that was for me, but...
Right. Are you saying that you said yes to a lot of opportunities professionally because you didn't have a boundary for yourself?
Well, I wasn't in touch with what I wanted. And so I just kept climbing the corporate ladder and crushing it, quite frankly. And
operating at a very high energy level.
Yes.
And it might have been out of alignment for you?
Absolutely. And there were aspects of it, and that's the thing is differentiating between, is this just, this is what I tell my clients, is this for you or for them? Mm-hmm. Are you living from the inside when you're making this choice, or from the outside? And who is this for? Is this for you? Does this really feel good? And so that was a really big turning point in my life, of realizing that I thought I was in alignment. I was getting praise all over the place. I was traveling. I was speaking. I was getting validation at a young age as a female in this industry, and because I was living from the outside, that consciously told me this is right. This is, how else would you get to this point at your age, in your position, if this wasn't right? You're very good at this. This must be right, right? And that's another trap, is we can be really good at something because we practiced it. I practiced showing up for people and showing up well and sacrificing my own needs and dreams. And so to bring it back, when we can connect deeper with ourselves, we can be like, nope, this is a no for me. This is a no for me.
Right.
And the outer yes is out of the limiting beliefs, out of the conditioning, out of the story.
The scarcity mindset, the lack mindset.
All those things. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a good example. Thank you very much for sharing all that. That was a really good summary of how to set boundaries for yourself.
There's more.
As you learn more about who you are. And I know that we've been chatting about recording this podcast episode since like November.
Yes.
I think that was the first time that we connected over the podcast topic, and it's now August of the next year. So that sounded to me as if like, okay, this isn't an alignment for me now, although we want to stay interested in the opportunity and developing a relationship along the way, but you needed to table it for later. And when you're sharing the story about writing your book while you were coaching, while you were VP, while you were also pregnant, how much of that experience was poured into the book? I barely have memories because I was just so go all the time,
all in the masculine, like just and there's an urgency that comes when one is pregnant of, it's not realistic, but like I gotta get everything perfect and everything done and all the big things before the baby comes, which doesn't happen,
right?
Especially when you're a people pleaser, you're never done. And writing the book was the best. That was where my heart was. That was a heart opener, a heart like consciousness moment, because I was like, this is what I want to be doing. Mm-hmm. This is my baby, not my real baby, but my baby, my book baby. This is following that inner guidance system. And, there were all these other things running in the background that, I had to stay on top of, but it started to, that's why writing a book, I also help clients publish, write and publish, because it does change your life. It connects you so deeply to yourself. These are, nonfiction books, but even through the fiction process, it's pouring something deep within you into something and being consistent with it to the point where you can't write a book if you don't believe you can be an author, if you don't believe that your story is important.
Right.
It won't happen.
Yeah.
That's why you write a little bit and it sits on your desk for 5 years or on your computer.
Yeah. But
when you fully move through that experience and you bring it to life and it's out there, you step into I don't even want to say a new identity. You step so deeply back into yourself on a level that you may not even remember. Like, it's a level that has been lost for so long. And that was my experience and the experience of many others. And so back to your question, doing all that was necessary for me because, for anyone listening who understands boundaries and has set them, it's not like this clean thing, like you move through life and you're like, oh, time for a boundary. You tend to get triggered. You tend to allow someone to cross your own. And I say it that way because we can't blame others, right? That's our responsibility. And it comes out of this kind of messy situation, right? And that's
relatable.
How we learn.
Yeah.
And this is a huge part of my program is releasing shame. We release a lot of things. We release things and people, but we release shame around how we think it's supposed to look, how mainstream personal development and self-help sells us things packaged in shame we don't even realize.
Right. They're telling us that there's something about us we need to fix. And to your point earlier, that there's nothing wrong with us. We're not broken. We may have goals and a certain thing that we want to bring into our lives, and if that's the direction that you want your growth to be in, then that might be very inward and growth focused and aligned.
Yeah, and there's a way to do it, and you actually go further if you can release some of the shame. If you have a day where you fail or a day that moves backwards a little bit and all that, getting into the mindset of, I'm really glad that happened. This is going to serve me. This is why, or this already has. I can already see it. And loving ourselves and giving ourselves grace is the way we move forward. We're going to fail no matter what. We're going to have setbacks no matter what. It's part of the journey, and if anything, it's like the bow and arrow. It's bringing us back so we can shoot forward. But if we are living outside of our body and living outside of our needs and desires, we tend to pile on the shame, which brings us even further away, and then we can't move through it so quickly. And we can't often see the lesson in it and the way that it is serving us.
Right.
Yeah, and so I personally had to go through that transition period of waking up, of understanding, wow, this career that I have worked so hard to get, sidebar, so hard to prove to everyone. I'm not, and a lot of growing up was very focused on my outside. I was a dancer, and you're so beautiful, and all this and all that, and so like in my relationships and in everything, like that was the forefront. So I had this life's mission of proving, no, I'm intelligent too.
Mm-hmm.
I have a brain.
Yeah.
I work hard. I didn't just get it handed to me because the way I look, there was a lot of disproving. And again, that is such a huge representation of living outside of ourselves. Because when we can learn how to connect with our body, where it starts, right? Like listening to it and understanding what's a yes, what's a no on the very basic level, that's when we start to foster that connection to self, that connection, when they say source, that's really just our highest being within, I think. And our decisions look different. Our boundaries are clearer. Enforcing them is, it comes with more ease and pride and confidence.
Yeah.
So that was a tough time, but it was an eye-opener, and I left the company May of 2018. I was pregnant, and then put myself fully into my business, published the book. Well, it was 2 months prior I published the book, and just moved forward with blinders on. And I can't tell you, family members, friends, people that just totally fell away, doubting me. But I learned how to connect inward.
Right.
And so none of that mattered. And I'm not going to lie to you. There were moments that I was like, wait, should I be doing this? Like, is this right? And leaning on my practices and trusting.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother topic of personally moving into the divine feminine embodiment within myself, because we do live in this very masculine, energetic environment, just generally in the Western world.
Right.
And
yeah, success focused almost entirely.
Yeah.
So did you have to give anything up to write the book, and then to?
Good question. Everything we say no to, leave space for a yes. Consciously, it was a really crazy time, so I'm not sure I know exactly what I did. Well, social life.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't hear you mention anything about a social life when you were talking about VP and your executive and your coaching business on the side, and writing a book and preparing to be a mother. And
it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was traveling 2 to 3 times a month, going to New York and various places, and there was really no room for that. There was there was really not a lot of room for my relationship at the time,
mm-hmm.
which was problematic. And and what I want to say, because again, a lot of this identity work that I do is about releasing shame. For anyone listening, you aren't going to do this perfectly. You aren't going to do this smoothly. You might have to pile on a lot of shit before you understand you need to unload it, or what to unload. Like, you might need to reach a breaking point so that you can wake up. In fact, most of us do. That's how it works. That's the human experience a lot of the time. Then you get better at it, of noticing, and you don't go back there as often. But yeah, that I look back on that time, and it was totally necessary. And I did not have a social life. I was totally focused, and probably not for the right reasons. It was urgency for the baby. It was showing up as all the things, because I was in, again, a field that didn't allow for the feminine. And when I say that, didn't allow for space and peace and breathing and calmness. It was proving, action, implementing, going, competing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another couple words that come to mind when you talk about the feminine and our masculine driven world towards success and achievement and production. I didn't hear you say giving or love.
That is a huge part of it.
Yeah,
and that's
what
interesting.
comes up for you?
What totally comes up for me is when I made that shift into the feminine, I was not prepared for the power that I possess. And I don't mean that in the way that, again, the masculine driven world often perceives it and labels it and depicts it. I mean, I became a magnet. This is how I live my life now, is in ease, in flow, and receiving and serving. And I don't mean, when we speak about the feminine, and I just love this work for that reason, and it's a huge piece of the program, is we don't need to create for third-party consumption. We just be who we are. We create what we create. It's like an art form. And when I started realizing I have a lot of skills, I have a lot to give, I am really gifted in a lot of areas, and just being that and serving, not using money as a driver, not trying to compete, not trying to prove. I attracted, I've had clients in the past that I'm like, I am dreading this phone call. I am dreading working with, I can't believe I have 3 more months with this person. I hope they don't renew. Like,
right.
If you're a coach, you understand. Or clients, in consulting.
Yeah, there's almost nothing more relatable than that.
Yeah, it's part of the journey. And
your body's going to kind of tell you if this is your ideal client or not. Like when you're having the conversation to get to know them, when you're asking for the sale, and then when you're coaching them along the way, your body's going to give you that response. You know
in the moment. And I moved through that. I went for the money. I went for the praise. I went for, I hope they choose me. I hope they choose me. This went for my relationships too. So it was a lot of that, and shifting into my own divine power, which happened through embodying the feminine, which I'm still in the process, because we don't have an external world environment, at least in this culture, that helps us cultivate that, right? So it's up to us. And this is, when I say us, I mean women, men, and other, like we all can step into that, but it's a discipline.
Right.
And when I did that and just showed up and served and just like completely fully expressed and embodied who I was, and we're always evolving, but when I did that, it was like effortless. And I love this story. I remember a mentor of mine 2 jobs ago that I was employed at, and she was always so poised. She always had like perfect hair and poise. I knew she had twins at home, and I'm like, and she was an executive at Nickelodeon, and she came to our company, and I was like, can we have a meeting? Because like I need to understand, because here I am, I'm the prover, I'm the pleaser, so I'm like a mess every day, I feel like, and everything's so busy and scattered. And this was years before I was really diving into this work. Like I was in the work, but I was in the fixer mode and pleaser mode. And I met with her, and she just embodied that. Like I started to understand, when you talk about leadership, like how powerful that is, because we think the feminine doesn't have a place in leadership. The feminine doesn't have a place in corporate. The feminine doesn't have a place in like major impact. We see all these men dominating like space travel and innovation. Right. And
where does that story come from?
Well, I don't know. Doesn't matter. We just need to
Right.
I don't,
because I don't know if you'd agree, but that's not true. When I hear
Correct.
You say those generalizations and those societal norms and constructs, I don't find that to be true, because I've had a lot of phenomenal coworkers and bosses that were in their feminine, and like you were saying, when you're embodying that energy, you begin to attract what's meant for you. And I feel as if those feminine leaders in my life were meant to come into my life to show me both the reflection and the polarity in a professional sense, but also for my own personal growth too.
Oh, it's life-changing when you can see it. And sometimes we aren't conscious to what's happening there, but we're like, this is a new kind of power. And again, I'm very careful when I use the word power, because it has this other depiction. But right. The power I'm speaking to, and especially with this mentor of mine, at the time it was the first time I had truly seen the example of that.
Yeah.
And it is a lot of times industry driven. My industry that previous industry at the time was very male dominated. It just was. And that moved me into some of that work, and it made me feel closer to my true identity, not the one I thought I had to be. And it improved every area of my life because I was more clear on what I wanted, because the feminine puts you in the being and the receiving and the flow, right? It's one of the affirmations when we step into the feminine is I flow like water, instead of going against everything and resisting. And a lot of times, when we have clients we don't want to work with and all of that, there's a lot of resistance around things. And so the feminine says, here's what's happening, and I understand that it's not in my control, and I'm just going to flow around it like water. There's nothing to fight against.
Right.
All is great. I am all receiving of this, and it was and is life-changing for me. It's something I am conscious to on a daily basis, and it's interesting to bring that into the conversation of leadership, because for so long I didn't realize that, because as that was the story. I'm young, I'm a woman, all the things that encompass that, moving into that space and thinking like, well, I better buckle up. I have a lot to prove here.
Right.
I have a lot to prove if I want to keep my seat at the table.
Right.
And that only made it harder. There was only more resistance with that.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot. So I like to ask, where did you hear about the Enneagram, and what was your first impression of understanding that your test came back as the Enthusiast?
So this is going to be a little controversial, so potentially. So I'll answer your first question, which is I have a phenomenal mother who became a single mom when I was 8, and she navigated that not perfectly, because none of us do as parents, especially single parents, but she definitely moved into a space of, it's time for me to help myself, heal myself, and be the example. And that was really incredible. And that's how I learned about all these, wonderful authors and world leaders to help me move into that space. And she read a lot. She loved to read. Even to this day, I will call her and be like, my coach mentioned this book. Do you have it? And she's like, yep, I'll send it to you. And it has all her little notes, and I'm just very blessed in that regard. So she actually, I think it was like 2000, it was like right after I graduated from college, so 2007 or 8, she got me the Enneagram for Dummies. Or no, Idiots.
Okay.
Idiot's Guide. That's what it was. That's
Guide. Probably where I should have started.
Have it. No, it is a phenomenal break. I don't love the name. There's shame in, you see what I'm saying? There's shame everywhere. But
right.
Anyway, regardless, at the time I was like, this is gold. And I was I moved to Chicago. Yeah, it must have been 2008. And I studied it. And, again, I told you, I prepped you before that I'm not an expert. But here's what I'm going to say, which might be controversial, is I identified as a 2.
Yeah.
At the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like a hardcore 2.
Okay.
And in my story, I don't think that's a surprise to you.
Not at all. Yeah. No, actually, that's one of the reasons why I ask.
Yeah. And, I have been so blessed to go through major transformations in my life, and I will add to that, it's from major trauma and a lot of tragedy, but luckily I was strong enough to move through it and see what was there for me to help me get through it and transform because of it, not letting it be for nothing. And through that, I many times over, through coaches requesting it and my own curiosity, I kept landing the past few years on a 7. I just kept testing as a 7. And there are experts, and I'm sure you've had them on your show, experts that I will say, you cannot change your Enneagram type. It doesn't change. That's why you have wing types and all these things. No matter what, I just see, I went through something extremely devastating about 2 years ago, and wouldn't take it back for the world. Would never do it again. I would not want to do it again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
but I wouldn't change anything about it for a second, which is insane to say. Mm-hmm. And all I can say is I remember the date, May 7th, 2019. I knew if I was going to survive it, I could not be... I had a meditation, and it said, a huge download, and said, you cannot be weak and strong at the same time. We move through those moments, but you have to pick a side. You have to make a choice. And what that explained to me was, you've been living in victim mode your whole life. Like, oh, I'm a woman in corporate, and they're going to try to crush me. I have to keep getting my seat at the table, or whatever the story was. You know, in relationships, I was always the victim. And, you know, and I can proudly say this because so many of us live in that and don't own it. And if I can be transparent about my experience to show people where I am now because I moved out of it, I'll do it. And every situation I was a victim in. And it varied in intensity. But that moment on that day in 2019, because of that devastation, I knew that I had to move out of that and empower myself. And because of that, I swear this is related to the Enneagram, like, I changed, I transformed. And when I say that, I didn't turn into a different person. Mm-hmm. I tapped into source. I tapped into that highest version of me. And I became a 7. I swear that's what happened. You know, there's not all positive with 7s. There was a nice little period.
Nor with 8s.
Yes.
Or 2s. Or
with any, yeah. There's, you know, where it's the polarity, as you say. And I had to catch myself, you know, getting a little too jazzed about things, like, and avoiding some of the healing, avoiding some of the hard stuff, compartmentalizing, you know, realizing that I was bypassing a lot of things. That's a big 7 trait.
Yeah.
Good vibes only.
Absolutely.
That was me.
Well, if I do enough things, then I will not feel the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I've really come to a place of understanding, I don't like the word balance because there's no such thing, but, you know, the harmony.
It's a clever word for control.
Yeah. Which control, we'll probably segue into this soon, control is attachment. I'm attached to an outcome. I'm attached to what it means and a label and all of that. So.
Yeah, I love how you were describing power earlier, and there's a huge difference between power and control. And that's the difference, is I can be in my power and still not be attached to an outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is part of being in true power, is not being attached to the outcome.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about business ownership, and from your timeline, it sounds like you wrote the book in 2018, you had your experience in 2019, and you still haven't quit. It's 2021.
I had moments. I had my moments.
And we're allowed to take days off. We're encouraged to take days off so that we can remain in our power. Because what I've understood is that if I go 24/7, I will crash and burn, and I'm no good for anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, again, like how you set boundaries. And even like you said, you know, the timing of the podcast, that's a huge feminine embodiment quality, is being in the flow of what's aligned, what's not, and knowing that every opportunity that wants you will come when it's ready. Yeah. You know, when you're ready.
Yeah, let me ask you a question on that topic, and I'll challenge the narrative that you've shared with me today about your corporate experience. So, let me ask you if there's a specific time or a general period of time in your corporate experience as the VP in accounting, where the structure of the business was created so that you could flow and grow and give your gift within that environment. So the narrative that I heard was like, you stepped into your masculine in order to climb the corporate ladder. But what if that structure was there in place so that you could, without maybe even knowing it, flow like the feminine energy, and that's how you...
And what comes to mind when you say that is this, and I think this is on topic, is the concept of intrapreneurship. So what I will say about this particular organization, they were a client of mine in my job previously and brought me in and gave me that opportunity because they saw my potential in that. And there was definitely a story at play. It wasn't necessarily that the environment was pushing that agenda on me. There was my story bringing it in of needing something to prove.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the structure, and I will never forget my boss and CEO who changed the way I look at my own leadership potential and my own power, because he allowed me to be a bit of an entrepreneur inside the organization. He allowed me creative liberties in keynotes and
allowed or encouraged?
Encouraged. You're
Okay.
correct.
Yeah.
And that's part of the story.
Yeah, the being allowed to do something within a structure of a corporate environment is part of the story. And what I'm hearing you share is that you were encouraged to grow as much as you possibly could.
Absolutely.
As an entrepreneur, is that what you called it?
Yeah, and that's that. When I was in corporate, in leadership, that was a huge.
Did you happen to work for Simon Sinek? Because that's like, off.
I love. Well, we very much brought his dogma into the organization.
Yeah, there's good reason for that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was a wonderful experience. I mean, it definitely opened up. That was the beginning of understanding that it didn't have to be the way that it always was, and it was definitely the first like taste of true power. And I love that you made the distinction between power and control. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm glad we were able to dig into that a little bit. That's part of the story that I wanted to touch on, and the reason why I love the Enneagram so much is how fluid it is. Our core type may or may not be completely solidified. Like, it's a very fluid system. Like, as an 8, I grow towards 2, and then when I'm in stress, I go towards the 5. Well, when you're growing as the 7, you go towards 5 too, so we can relate so much. And in your story, there's a lot of scarcity and a lot of lack from the generation before you. And so that might be the narrative that you're taking on. And yet, when you're growing, you take that scarcity and that lack mindset that a 5 normally has, and you push it away. As in, like, not push it away, because that's true 7 terminology.
Yes.
But you're simply just like, your power, your personal power, your feminine power, helps you rise above that.
And something I'll say to that, and we'll put it in different contexts, is this was just such a huge turning point again in my healing journey, was understanding the concept of wounded inner child, what that truly is, which is the, unconscious manifestation of suppressed emotions, unmet needs from childhood, usually. Yeah. And understanding who that child is, how it was born, or the experiences it was born out of, and their lack of safety in the world, and whether that's through my, personally I can speak for myself, my own lack of boundaries, all of that, and acknowledging them, but also understanding that they're not in the driver's seat. They don't drive this bus anymore. They're there, and I acknowledge them, but I get to reparent myself.
Right.
I get to move into a space of responsibility and ownership moving forward. So I hear you sometimes, inner child. I hear that you want to be validated. I hear that old story and all of that, but I have moved and shifted into the higher version of myself, the current version of myself, the true identity, because that inner child is just a story. It's that's why Carl Jung came up with this. We can now move through healing because we sometimes give it a name, and we give it a whole visual, and it's a concept that we can actually hold as a bit tangible, so that we can move through that work. And so I have a name for my wounded inner child, and I address her, and sometimes I'm like, I hear you, and I acknowledge you, and we're safe. And you know why we're safe? Because I'm enforcing this boundary right now, and all is good. This doesn't go away, but now I can understand that's not actually my inner guidance system. That's my wounded inner child. And so when the 5 is like, oh, come on, you're lacking, this is scary, this might not be a good move, and all of that, it's that's a different way that I also approach it, is that's a piece of my conditioning in my past and needs that were not met, that I now as an adult meet myself. And that's a huge piece of living from the inside versus the outside, is becoming your own primary partner.
Yeah. It's
a concept we don't understand. We're like, get married, have kids, get the fence, get the dog, get the good job, all that stuff, and everything is all of that is outside of ourselves.
Right.
Not understanding from a young age, because we didn't have examples a lot of the time, is what does it look like to love yourself unconditionally and compliment yourself and show up that way. And I have a close friend who's just an incredible healer. She's a mystic, if you're familiar with all of that, but she's just highly intuitive and works through that energy body. work, and she would say, and I was at a workshop, or I hosted a retreat, and she did a workshop, and she said, I'm the woman of my dreams. And that will make some people cringe, because it's like, how dare you honor yourself on that level? Like, what is that? You know, and now that I've moved into that space of, I am the woman of my dreams, I am so capable, I am meant to do what I'm doing because I am aligned, so I have that belief now every day. So much comes with that, you know, and that is where true healing begins, is recognizing what are the things that are triggering me and why, and not running from it.
Yeah. What is triggering me and not who is triggering me.
Yeah, because it's not the person.
No, it rarely is.
No.
Because our inner child has memories stored for years and years and years. So, yeah, thank you very much for introducing Carl Jung and the shadow work and how it relates to our inner child work. And that's something I'm expanding on personally. It's a true focus of mine. Mine, like yours, shows up around 8. I think you mentioned 13 years old as well. A couple of time frames.
And commonly when I do the NLP and all of that stuff with clients, it's around like 4 or 5. They go back to a memory.
Okay.
So if we really go deep, you might discover it's earlier.
Right?
Yeah.
Mine's at birth, like when I did the NLP work, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So those memories come up of like at birth.
That's so
very
powerful.
Consistently, yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's the portals of healing open up. And this is a funny thing. It's like, you know, some people, when I have an initial call with them and go through kind of the premise of what we do, because if it's 12 weeks in one of my programs, right, the Less Effect program, we go through, the first half is really in the feminine. We're going deep within, we're bringing, you know, subconscious belief systems into our consciousness, and we're putting ourselves face to face with it. We're going through all that work in the feminine. And then we move into the masculine of, we start decluttering, we start, you know, actually doing a lot of the implementation of that, because we're now rooted in that truth and identity. And, you know, I have people say, I'm too overwhelmed. I think it's not the right time. I'm like, it's the perfect time. Yeah. You know, and when I say that, I bring this up because there's this fear around the unknown of what's stored in there, and we don't want to know. And we don't realize that fear is being created all around us every day, subconsciously, every single day, every choice we make. And that's pain. And we just make it normal. You said earlier, before we even started recording, you know, when people say, oh, how you doing? I'm okay. Yeah. It's like, wow, you're okay?
That's a phrase that's no longer part of my language.
I love it.
I think I stopped myself in the middle of that. Like, no, I'm not going to just say I'm okay today, because that's not the truth. Yeah. And so when I get asked that question, I give an honest answer, but it's not the whole story, because there's not an opportunity for that. But also, there's certain people that haven't earned the right to hear that story yet. I have set a personal boundary with myself of what I will share. Yeah. I love that. And but I'm going to share more than just I'm okay, because that's not the truth. Right. And boundaries are, gosh, we could do a whole episode on this, but I think 3 years of the podcast talking about boundaries, I'm still learning. We all are. We're, as long as you're growing, you're learning, right? Mm-hmm. And vice versa, right? It's just it's the boundary thing is interesting, because we definitely tend to associate them with pain. And then we'll set one, and maybe the worst case scenario that we imagine happens. We lose someone. And you have to think in that moment, I just expressed something that I need, that is aligned with my path, that is healthy for me and necessary for me. And that person left my life. You have to be grateful in that moment. And it won't feel good initially. Right. Yeah. But you got to get to a place of gratitude for now making space for someone who honors that boundary. And when you start to, and then you start to bring in people that I have so many, not so many, but more than I would expect of girlfriends, for example. And we have what I would have otherwise deemed as uncomfortable conversations. Now I'm like, oh, I am so grateful
hey, something happened today. Can you talk? No, I'm not in a space to receive that right now. Can we talk at 5 o'clock when I'm done with work? Great.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's so much love in that space. There's so much love of, I get to honor someone I care about. That person is honoring what they need, and they're showing me love by, the opposite is not enforcing boundaries and then retaliating, and it becomes a whole mess. And to me now, I understand that boundaries show so much love, and as a mother, I can't even begin to explain, and I'm not going to do it perfectly, but the joy that I've healed a lot of those wounds, and I've learned boundaries so I can be an example of boundaries for him, because I didn't have that example. I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
And yeah, there's going to be moments with my kid. He's going to be 3 next month, and it's, he's young now, but this is where it starts. We know this from Wounded Inner Child. Like, this conditioning starts so early. And leading my son through his life, getting to show him things like boundaries and, not upholding these conditions rooted in shame that so many of us, you and I, and so many of us were, grew up with.
Yeah.
I get to do it a little bit differently, and that's why it's just funny in moms groups and things, and I'm so grateful for my support. And there's a lot of conversation of like, have you read this trending book? Have you read this trending book? And it's like, how about we all just heal ourselves and then go from there? Because I feel like that's probably the best thing we can do for our kids.
Less is more, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's good, right? I'm already going to work on healing myself, and then it's just going to hopefully positively influence him and create, all we want to do is create a better life than the one before. Like, my mom did better than her mom, and I'm hoping I'm doing a little better than her, and we just, you're a dad, you understand. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you so very much for that additional insight at the very end of our conversation today. I want to leave you with a question, but first, how can people get a hold of you if they love your message today?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram, so you can find me at I am Samantha Joy, and you can also find my book on Amazon, The Less Effect, Design Your Life for Happiness and Purpose.
Awesome. So the question I want to leave you with, because the Enneagram is so fluid, and we don't have time enough to go into it today, but the 2 and the 7 can oftentimes be mistyped for each other. And that's probably why you saw those two tests at different times in your lives show up differently. So the question I want to ask you is, do you say yes to other people so that you don't miss out? Or do you say yes to other people so that you receive love?
So I usually say, let me get back to you. That's a boundary that I do, and it has saved me because I get to tap back into me and my body and my connection. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for. And
no, actually, I think that's the best answer that you could provide.
Yeah, and then so the yes is truly to have a mutually beneficial experience with this person. That's the standard. That's the goal.
That sounds like a very integrative version of one or the other types.
Oh, okay. And I do wonder now that we had this conversation, maybe I mistyped myself as a 2. I wonder.
It's quite possible.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, this was great.
Yeah, I'm glad we got a chance to do it. Thanks, Sam.
You're welcome.
All right.
Maybe another time we can dive into boundaries in a whole episode.
Yeah, you want to follow up in the next 6 months or something like that? See where each other is at?
Definitely.
All right. That sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, everyone, as much as I did. Sam could not have been a better guest for me to bring on at this time, as I am trying to step up into a more essentialist and minimalistic lifestyle where I'm eliminating distractions on a daily basis. That begins with a morning routine, journaling, meditation, breath work, and a little bit of light reading before my day begins. And that really sets me up for success. What are the things in your life that are distracting you from reaching your goals right now? That's something that I had to take a hard look at in my own life. And I couldn't be more grateful for Sam's conversation as she joined me on the podcast today. If you're looking for a little bit more support in your life right now, whether that be fitness, nutrition, or personal growth, don't hesitate to reach out to me today. You can find me on Instagram at The Challenger Podcast, where I'm available to answer your questions. Until next week, this is Dave Glazer in Denver, Colorado, wishing you health and happiness wherever you're at in the world. The challenge we face today is that we are more connected to our devices than we are to ourselves and to one another. We are so distracted by instant gratification and access to information, images, and influence that we are numbed by it. Social media, porn, and dating apps have convinced us that we can have what we want whenever we want it, so we shrink inward. We are putting other people's needs before our own, and that leaves us feeling small and unseen in our partnerships. We put others up on a pedestal, which leaves us discounting our truest potential in life.